One of my clients called my office today because he's about to embark on a new collaboration. He has a new single, and so he's going to collaborate with someone to help market that single. Now, my client wants to do a contract, but his collaborator doesn't. And apparently, that's just what he does. He doesn't do contracts. So in today's video, we're going to discuss when to get music contracts. Hi guys, I'm Miss Krystle. I'm an entertainment attorney and public speaker. I'm the owner of Dukes Up Records, and most importantly, I'm an independent musician. We release videos just like this every week to help you with your music careers and to help you get to that next level. We discuss things like music marketing, copyright, trademarks, and everything in between. So let's get into the video. First, it's really important that we just understand what we're saying when we talk about a contract or an agreement. Now, we can say, well, we have a contract or we don't, but the reality is that if you are entering into a relationship where there's an exchange of money and services, you have a contract whether you put it down on paper or not. Now, in fact, most agreements are enforceable just because they are verbal agreements or handshake agreements. Most people don't understand that. So even if you say, oh, we're not going to do a contract, it doesn't mean that there still isn't an enforceable agreement. The tricky part just happens when it comes to actually enforcing the agreement, because now you're probably going to have a he said, she said kind of issue that you run into versus you actually have it in black and white in four corners of a piece of paper that both parties signed. So as a baseline kind of understanding, you are entering into contracts and agreements. The difference is whether you take the time to actually commit it into a signed writing. Now, look, if you really want to dive into contract law, there are certain agreements that always have to be in writing, such as for the sale of real property, but we're talking about music contracts in this instance. So just keep that very clear in your minds as far as there is an agreement between you and your collaborators. The difference is just whether you put it in writing. Now, what happens when you're talking to people who don't do contracts? Trust me, I've had my own share of producers in particular that I've worked with who maybe are old school, they do it as on handshake deals, and that's a very risky thing to do. I've personally been burned very badly by this, and enough so to where I just absolutely will not do any collaborations without contracts anymore. So as I'm talking to my client today, the question was, well, what about my genre? So I'm in hip hop, I do rap music, and so within our genre, what I hear and what I'm being told is that we don't do contracts. Who has time for that? Who has the money for that? And so I'm basically being told that if I push this, I might lose the relationship. I might lose the opportunity. And that's a scary thing. If you're either at the beginning stages of your career or you think there's going to be a really amazing opportunity for you around the corner. And this is kind of the baseline of like our fears as musicians, as independent artists, that we're going to lose something if we don't jump at it and we say yes. So back to the question of, well, when do you get a contract? Now, something that I want you guys to keep in mind is just to think about what type of people are the ones who don't want to do contracts. Because what I can at least answer universally is that really you should always have contracts, especially if it's for your music. If you are retaining control of your music and you're working with someone else and there's nothing that is clear, for example, if they're just distributing your music or they're helping you out, and if there's nothing clear on paper about the relationship, what could happen, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And in my experience, sometimes you end up being taken advantage of because people will say, I don't do contracts, but there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's because they don't want to have their names on paper. They don't want their companies noted. They don't want you knowing where they live. And it's because maybe even something like they don't want to get sued. So you can't find them all of a sudden. Sometimes maybe it's not even that shady. Maybe they just feel a little insecure because they are at a certain level. And what I'll challenge all of you guys to think about is that in order for you to really be perceived as real life, to be doing this as your career, your passion, it's not a hobby, you need to be real life, and real life artists get contracts. Do you think Jay-Z's not doing contracts? Can't imagine. So as you're kind of chatting with a particular person, things are going really well, and now you bring up the question of, well, are we going to do a contract? And they say no. It's really important that you ask yourself, why don't they want to do a contract? Here's the reality. There are people who move forward on handshake deals. I've had clients who will go into business with their best friends of a decade or even more, and for the first time, they see a different side of their partner. And sometimes, unfortunately, things go horribly wrong. And so while you expected that everything was going to work out, especially because you have a standing relationship with someone, when money gets involved, people's behaviors change. So moving on to the next section, let's talk about the upside and the downside of getting music contracts. The benefit of doing contracts is that it forces parties to have conversations up front. You can't agree to a contract until you've actually had a discussion about what's going to be in the contract. And so let's say, for example, it's a collaboration agreement. You and I work together. We have a new song that's coming out. Well, at this point, the song's ready to come out, but we don't have a contract. At a minimum, if not before now, we should have sat down, have a conversation about ownership, money, who gets a split of what, who's able to, let's say, distribute or release. Sometimes if there's multiple parties or songwriters to a song, who has the authority to actually release it or announce it the first time. All of these things we usually don't think about until we've already released the music or we've already taken steps into this collaborative process. And so it gets really tricky, and this is usually where problems arise. As an entertainment attorney, my clients unfortunately will often call my office because we are now beyond the time that they should have actually gotten a contract in place, but now there's a dispute because something wasn't discussed ahead of time, because someone else is trying to take advantage and they're taking more money, they're not reporting, whatever it is that's going on. And they're contacting me because now we need to have dispute resolution. And sometimes this ends up blowing up into a litigation case, into now we need to have a settlement conference. And it gets so expensive for the client when it could have been resolved right up front had they just had the discussion. So the upside, again, is always going to just be that you had those important discussions, you agreed on the terms, and you wrote it on a piece of paper. So now when that dispute comes up, you can go back to that document. You can say, here, this is where we agreed on payment terms. This is where we agreed on who would have copyright ownership. And it allows us to get through those dispute resolutions a lot quicker. Now, conversely, the downside, of course, is going to be that we have not had those discussions and anything can happen. And there can be interpretations of what things meant, because now we're going to be looking at things like, what did you say in those text messages? What did you say in emails? Well, that's all evidence that can be used against you to say, well, this was really a verbal agreement. Going back to my main point at the beginning of this video, even if you don't think that there's a contract, you basically form an agreement with your collaborators and there becomes a verbal handshake agreement. And so as attorneys, what we do is we look at things like these, what I will call penumbral sources of evidence, Facebook Messenger, text messages, emails, and this is how we show that there really was a contract. But again, we're talking about a lot of expense to get to that point, and all of this energy and all of this resource that you had have now been invested in basically resolving this dispute. So there are really massive downsides to not having a contract, not discussing it up front. And so this is why the final point really to this video is to always get everything in writing. Never do your collaborations on a handshake deal. Never hire a manager or an agent or do anything related to your music career without getting it in a signed writing. Guys, I just have seen these situations implode over and over and over because what we're talking about is relationships. We're talking about people, and unfortunately in the entertainment industry, we're very passionate and we're very emotional. And so sometimes this might not even be, hey, you breached the contract. It's more of an emotion-driven kind of thing. But at the end of the day, the contracts make a massive, massive difference for you, your career, and of course, just the continuity of things. So now you're not tied up in litigation for 6 months, for a year and a half over a song that was only supposed to be one of many projects that you did, let's say even just for that 1 year. Now, a key to all of this is going to be that you have templates that you can use when it comes time to do these deals. There's going to be a lot of contracts that you end up using over and over and over, such as photographer agreements, management agreements, collaboration agreements. Now, the good news is that if you have your own templates, you get familiar with the language. You know what it is that these contracts say, and so you'll be able to understand them a little bit better over time. And even if you decide to hire an entertainment attorney to help, well, what you can do is actually take your template and have them use that. Have them revise it, and so you have a stronger agreement that you can then regurgitate over and over for your different deals. Now, besides having the templates kind of in your back pocket, you're ready to rock and roll, here's a direct situation that you're going to get into. You say, great, let's do the deal, let's move forward. The other person says, I don't do contracts. What I'm telling you that you guys need to do is to say, that's not how I do business. Because all of a sudden now, you set the tone. You set the tone of what's going to be acceptable and really, quite frankly, how it is that you're going to conduct yourself and how you're going to do business. If the person that you are potentially looking to work with doesn't do contracts, go back to why don't they want to do contracts? And quite frankly, I'll even say this, that a lot of people who don't do contracts end up kind of doing themselves a disservice. A contract exists to protect both parties, not just you, but it's to make it very clear about the relationship, the scope, the ownership. And so it ends up being beneficial for everybody. So if you get pushback again, try to look at why it is that that person doesn't want to have a contract. And sometimes the answer isn't so good. So to bring this back around, the question at the beginning of the video was, when do you get music contracts? The answer is you get music contracts anytime you do a new deal. I don't care if it's with a family member, a best friend, or a complete stranger. I don't care if the opportunity is really small or the biggest opportunity of your life. You always want to have contracts, even if they're very simple. Guys, take the time to really build your templates, find them online, hire an entertainment attorney, especially for those big deals, and take the time to invest in yourself. Because this is really what we're talking about. Invest in yourself and make sure that you stay safe. And if you get into that situation where you're about to do a new deal and the other person doesn't want to do a contract, ask why. And if you decide to move forward without a contract, just understand that you're putting yourself at a pretty exposed position, and that usually doesn't end well too often. Guys, the reason I got a call earlier today from my client is because he was looking for reinforcement. To know that it's okay to ask for contracts, even if someone that you're working with doesn't want to do it, and what that means. He had a gut instinct that he wanted a contract and he would feel more comfortable based on the situation moving forward with a signed agreement, but he was being told something else. Now, as someone who's been in the industry for over 20 years, I've seen every type of deal that can go wrong. I've also worked with people who don't want to sign contracts, and unfortunately for them, sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes that's a really bad way of doing business. And so I just want to encourage you to have your own templates to protect yourselves and basically have your own self-confidence to know that you're going to have everything in a signed writing, or you're just not going to do the deal. Also, if I can reinforce as well on social media, that's why I do a lot of the posts throughout the week, and just to talk about empowering you guys. And if you want to come say hi anytime, please do on Facebook or Instagram. Those are probably the two most active platforms for me, and I love meeting you guys. I'm going to get out of here, but on next week's video, we're going to talk about finding a mixer for your music. Make sure you're subscribed, turn on that bell notification so you get notified every time we have a new video, and I'll see you guys on the next one. I'm Miss Krystle. Bye.